Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Raceday review. My name is Joe and I am the NASCAR writer for LineStar, one of the leading daily fantasy, they call themselves tout sites, but they're actually an analytics company. You can follow along with me on Twitter and at JoeJets19. I'm also on FanDuel and DraftKings. My handle is JoeJets19. I created a YouTube site, and that's going to be for Race Day Review, and then also Twitch is JoeJets19. Today we're going to be going over the Federated Auto Parts 400 that was just finished up Saturday night at Richmond Motor Speedway. I know after the first episode I said I would do this weekly. Unfortunately, vacation cut me a little short last week and I didn't have enough time to record, but I'll try to hit every single one of the races going forward. This was my first live one. We'll see how it goes this time. I will try to get a set time since it was a Saturday race and I was kind of slow on Monday. I'm able to do this Monday. I think I might start doing these Tuesday night just to not compete with Monday Night Football, but we'll see how it goes. So let's jump right into the review. As always, we'll start with the perfect lineup, and Saturday night's race went kind of like according to what we were looking for. Before we get there, I'll see what were the targets. Who was I looking to play before going into the race? In the last couple of years, they've been either one dominator races, but with the new package, I thought that there would be a little more passing. Passing is hard at Richmond. Busch complained about it last week, how it was impossible to pass at Richmond. But I thought, at least for the lead, I didn't think one driver would be able to hang on for the lead too long. I was thinking about probably two, maybe three, definitely two drivers would at least lead 100 laps. There are 400 laps that were being run. So 100 is normally the benchmark to make yourself a dominator. So I wanted at least two, maybe three drivers that would be able to lead some laps. And looking historically, you don't really get too many dominators. We didn't get any dominators in the last 5 or 6 races that started anywhere further back than 11th. So right off the bat, the drivers I was looking for. Let's go to the loop data for you. So these drivers are the ones I was looking at, all the way Keselowski, all the way down to McDowell. Did I think Michael McDowell was going to lead any laps? Absolutely not. So he got thrown out pretty quickly. Jimmy Johnson has a good history here. I liked him for a top 10 possibly. He's out of the playoffs, so he wasn't running for any points or anything like that. So I didn't really like him too much. Kurt Busch is kind of fighting for his life. He was a possibility, but if we go to see some of his practice times and things like that, Kurt Busch. He was priced pretty nice, but his last 5 finishes, he only was a 10.4, so he would end up losing spots, and also his average place differential. So he normally starts around 5th. This week he was starting 9th and finishes 10th. So I didn't really like him from a place differentials aspect. He didn't really lead laps. His average run, he normally runs right around 9th also. Sorry, that shouldn't say India, I apologize. He normally runs around 9th. His average finish this season has been 11th, so I didn't really like him as much of a dominator. His single lap times were terrible and his 10 lap time was terrible, so he was really off of my radar also. Now this is when we start getting interesting. Martin Truex Jr., he won the week before in Las Vegas, so he's coming in hot. He's already got his bye to the next round of the playoffs, and because he's got to win. Um, I really liked him. I absolutely loved him this week because he's led more than 120 laps in 5 of the last 6 races here. He hasn't done it from starting this far back, so that is a concern. But he had 400 laps to make up 7 spots, and once he got up front, I didn't think he was going to get caught. Turns out he did get up front. He was able to lead 109 laps when it was all said and done, including getting the win. As you see, he wasn't the biggest lap leader because Busch ended up taking the cake with that one. But we'll get to him in a second. But Truex, I really like Truex. I thought he had a very big ceiling. My models, I mentioned a little bit about my model last time, but I run 10 different models, and they're all based on the things that we see here. Finishing position at the track, average run position at the track, place differential from that track, then similar track, same thing, finishing position, place differential, average run, and then I had take a weight of the single lap times, and then I ranked the drivers by the weight. So it's not just a straight who was the fastest; it was who was the fastest depending on which track, um, which practice they ran, their qualifying trim as much as race trim. I weight the race trim practice more because I've seen throughout the models that there is a favor to one practice to the other. So I try to make it a much heavier weighted average towards the race trim practice, but the qualifying trim does play a little bit of a role because you have to know when going gets tough and they're going to try to pick up as much speed as humanly possible and tape up the grill and all that other fun stuff if there actually is speed in the car in ideal situations. So once I get that number, I rank them through the field to see who has the fastest car. I do the same thing for the 10 lap average. You don't normally get a 10 lap, and in most tracks you don't get a 10 lap average by the whole field, and usually not in both practices because it was only a 3/4 of a mile track. We actually got 30 lap averages for some drivers in second practice, and we got a 10 lap average for just about everyone, so that made it a little bit easier. And then some of the models take account starting position, some of the models don't. For anyone who follows along with LineStar, the one that I've been posting most recently has not taken into account into starting position. I thought it was the most ridiculous thing possible because how are you going to score DFS? How are you going to score points in DFS if you're not going to make up any spots? But it turns out that the most accurate models that I've come up with have all been independent of starting position, which is fairly entertaining to do, especially in a race today that was impounded and they had to do inspection in the early afternoon. Is that we had the preliminary starting lineup, and I already knew exactly right around where I thought my drivers were going to finish. It didn't turn out to be that big of a deal, but I'm just going to highlight this column. This was the model that I based off of primarily. It was the most accurate model this week. Sorry about that. And so it had Bowman finishing at 19th. He ended up finishing 24th. So I actually like Truex to finish first in this model. Sorry, I thought it was actually Logano, but I had Truex finishing first in this model, which was great. So it nailed that pretty much. Doesn't really help me about who's going to dominate, but it will help me about who will finish where. So this is an interesting little thing. I run all of them, then I have an average and also a low and a high. So sometimes what I like to do is I like to put them in order and see who these models show will be a winner, and I try to take my dominator pool out of them. And I actually went 3 for 3 this week. Ken Slowski ended up leading 89 laps. He didn't win, but he had a good shot. This is live on camera. And that's my wife, who did not realize that I was live and on camera. So there you go. If anyone's actually watching that, you can say hi to my wife. Um, so as I'm going back, Kyle Busch also popped up on my models, which would put him, gave him a chance to win. He led a whole ton of laps, 202, and most of everyone had him going in between first and eighth. So that had him that gave him a nice. Uh, if he didn't lead laps, he probably wouldn't have been in the perfect lineup, but he ended up. And then two, which would have ended up being low-owned dominator or low-owned winners, Chase Elliott and Clint Boyer. Um, they had one model each that pretty much thought that they were going to do well. The other ones not so much. So I put a little bit of stock in that, just to see what was going on. One lineup out of 15, one lineup out of 10 maybe. But it's always good to test it that way. Sorry, that got a little sidetracked on me. But as we were going through and seeing, so I wanted three drivers that I thought would be able to win. So Truex also already got there. I didn't think Amarola had enough in his car. Hamlin had the best the best 10 lap, 15 lap, 20 lap, and 30 lap averages in second practice. So he was definitely in my player pool. I ended up going a little bit higher on him than I absolutely should have. He ended up finishing third. He had no laps led. He had some fastest laps, so disappointing for the price, but still, if he went, he had just as much of a chance of going off as Martin Truex Jr., and definitely maybe a little bit more than Keselowski, so he was worth a shot. Clint Boyer, I mentioned, he's fighting for his playoff life also. He was trying to, I had a little bit of him. He just didn't do a lot for me. Kyle Busch was the major dominator. He had the best car the first time they were in Richmond, and if it wasn't for a pit problem, he absolutely would have dominated the entire race, but since he had the pit problem, Truex got it there. Kyle Busch is just on a different level entirely when it comes to pit strategy, and not even strategy, just his pit crew is about a half a second faster than anyone else in the field. So there was a probably, I know exactly when it was, at the end of the first stage, Keselowski ended up leading most of the first stage, but Kyle Busch made it up to second, and everyone just knew that the minute that the stage break came and they all had to do stops, as long as he was taking 4 tires and fuel just like Keselowski was, he was going to get out on front, and that's what he ended up doing. And he led, I'm pretty sure, the entire second stage. He might have missed a couple of laps, but he led the entire second stage just from making up time. He had a fast car, obviously, but at the time he made the pass on pit road pretty much. Once he started in the front row, he took off, and it's just time and time again. I would like to call him a boom and bust pit crew, and the reason I would say that is because when they're not shaving off a half a second from the field, they're getting themselves in all sorts of penalties. There was one race this year where he got two different safety violations. He got a speeding violation and a safety violation that ended up making him do a pass-through penalty, and he still managed to finish in the top 5. So it's just a combination of great equipment. He's an awesome driver, and he's able to make up any mistakes that the pit crew happens to do. Harvick was the kind of driver that also doesn't have the pit speed, but they have just as clumsy of a crew. And whenever he gets a pit penalty, it ends up screwing up his day. Busch is the exact opposite of that. And then more, just to finish off the top 11 of who I thought would possibly be a dominator. Elliott, I didn't have a ton of faith in. His times weren't really that great. Give me 1 second. He had a very good single lap average. His 10 lap average wasn't awesome, and his average finish here was 11th. So normally he qualifies pretty poorly, comes up and finishes 11th, maybe a couple of top 10s in there. Same thing for his he hasn't had a great year this year at similar tracks. He had an average finish of 15th. So I didn't have a ton of confidence in him, maybe a share or two. Kevin Harvick, I he wasn't that highly owned, and it was probably a good idea because for whatever reason, even when he starts on the pole, he hasn't really been able to dominate the last couple of races at Richmond. His car wasn't the absolute best. I mean, a single lap average, weighted average of 5, and a 10 lap weighted average of 5 is pretty good. But it's just you had the clean air with Keselowski in front of him, and then you had the two big dogs of Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr., who had the track history as well as the speed in the cars. So I was a lot lower on Kevin Harvick than some people, and the reason I can say that with confidence is I think I only played him in 5% of lineups. So just in case, I threw a bullet in there just in case he does go off. Keselowski was probably my biggest miss of the week. I didn't think he had that much of a chance to lead. As you see, he led 22.2% of the laps, which ended up being 89 laps. He even had 10% of the fastest laps. So he put up a very, very, very good score. For his price, I think he was only he's like 9,800. This week I included prices, so I didn't have to guess. We can just look at him. Um, he was 9,800. He didn't have a great history here. He hasn't had the best history at similar tracks. He had a pretty fast car, but as always, the clean air is king. I had him as I thought he'd finish third. He ended up finishing fifth. He didn't make it into the perfect lineup, which was surprising to me. Um, I guess he was just too expensive, even though he did put up a massive score. He actually wasn't even in the winning lineup this year, so this week the winning lineups were different than the perfect lineup, which doesn't happen too often. But the contest sizes are getting smaller, so we'll get there in a minute. So I really narrowed down my. I thought it was going to take 3 dominators. I ended up playing a lot of Truex. I ended up playing a lot of Kyle Busch, and I didn't use this wasn't a traditional dominator, but I fell into the Joey Logano chalk. I thought he had a very good chance of the top 5. I thought he had an even better chance, and also great chance of winning. I didn't think he was going to be able to lead too many laps, but if he did, that was even better. He was cheaper than Kyle Busch. He was cheaper than Kyle Busch, Truex, and Hamlin. So I thought that he had a lot, and he had a whole bunch more place differential points. There are about 280 Dominator points available, so it gets into a little bit of a tricky situation of balance of which would you rather, the place differential points or the Dominator points. Um, I went into it a little bit in the article, but that's a preview article. Now we're going on the review. I wanted my floor. The way I built these lineups is I ate a whole bunch of chalk with um, Bubba Wallace. So he was one of the only cars to fail inspection, and there were 3 cars that failed inspection. He was the only car that was worthwhile. I always have a hard time playing him when he starts in the 29th or 30th, and he practices pretty well, and um, everyone thinks he's gonna score pretty nicely and get into the top 20 and all that other fun stuff. And he always finds a way to wreck out and kill me. But I am a huge believer in play the chalk play the chalk in NASCAR. I love playing chalk in NASCAR. I wish I had a meme. I might just make one of me just eating chalk all day. I had 80% of Bubba Wallace. The reasoning is because he started 37th. He's only 6,400. If he crashed out, that would have sucked. But there was still a good chance that he didn't cost enough that he would have ruined my night. And if at a high variance track, I would be able to. That would be even better because you would expect a couple other people to crash out also, and at least he wouldn't go negative. Um, that's not the case at Richmond. There wasn't anyone that really went negative, so there wasn't too much of an issue there. I think Ross Chastain might have been the only one that put up a score close to 0. So he had a very solid floor. Worst case scenario was he finished in like the 27th or 28th. Even then, he put up a acceptable amount of points, and it opened up a lot of room. So there was about a 10%, 10 to 15% chance he crashed, and I hit it. I played him at 85%, just so I would, if he crashed in the 15%, I have a couple of cushions. But if not, that was I was gonna just ride him and see what happens. And the other part of that was I played Logano at 75% because I didn't know, I couldn't tell you 100% who was going to dominate. Was it going to be Kozlowski? Was it going to be Harvick? Was it going to be Kyle Busch and Truex? Sure, I thought that they had a chance, but they were owned about anywhere between 25 to 35% in any tournament that was being run, and that was probably about the amount of time that I thought that the possibility of them leading laps and being the main dominator. So the market weight was about the exact thing that I was looking for. So that the field was pretty sharp on that. So